Computer. All right. So, um, now we're recording.
All
Do
right.
you feel any different?
Not yet.
Okay. So, Josh Stone, Stone Home Inspections. Um, you are my go-to inspector, and what I like about you is you have a thinking man's approach to this. You find things, you explain them clearly, um, and you don't have people clutching their pearls, screaming that a superficial thing is going to kill them, right? So
100%.
uh, you've got an amazing story. So tell me about a little bit about the journey that has you, leading this, founding this growing, well-regarded home inspection company.
Sure. First of all, I had to thank you for having me. And first of all, I lived in Yorktown at the time, and I was NYPD, kind of. So I was NYPD for 20 years, but I was probably about 15 years in when I met one of my neighbors who just happened to become a home inspector. And not only was he an inspector, but he also was teaching the class. So he's like, "Hey, you should, think about taking the course." And I wasn't really thinking about it. I actually did have prior mortgage experience, so I figured I would either be a realtor or be a loan officer. But I said, you know what, this is kind of interesting. Let me take the course. I was definitely strapped for cash. Being a cop wasn't easy, so coughing up the thousands of dollars for the training was not easy. But I went for it, and it was definitely a very slow go in the beginning, trying to get my name out there. Trying to show people what I do. My first inspections was basically for friends, and the course really doesn't teach you what you need to know, honestly. Like, you come out of there and you have a pretty vague idea of what is going on, but if you don't really have any construction knowledge, you might be lost. So for me, it was pretty good. I had a pretty good grip on things, but things definitely got a lot better as time went on. But yeah, that was basically the start of Stone Home Inspections. It was just me, just one person trying to get business, trying to figure out how to get it. And then when I started getting it, then I had to bring my wife into the business, who also helps me generate, new relationships and keep relationships and manage all things, including our three children. So without her, we couldn't keep this together. So
Funny how that works is like you're growing when you need help,
yes,
and
yes, well, yeah, for sure.
and having the spousal help is a big deal because they need to be on the same page with you to
A
handle it,
hundred
right? I mean,
percent. So it was kind of funny because she really had no idea what I was doing, but yet I had to basically throw her to the fire because the phone kept ringing, and I'm a police officer at work. I can't answer calls, so I was like, "Listen, at this time, you have to take the phone and figure it out." And she figured it out, and people loved her, and then it really helped, grow us to what we are today because I could be out there doing inspections, and I'm not in a crawl space answering the phone. She's handling the phones. I'm handling the actual hands-on work.
yeah,
So
yeah. I
it
mean,
really it works out.
you want to be, if you're in a crawl space, you want to be focused on what's in front of you and not. Yeah, let me write that down. Let me check my calendar. Right.
100%. Yeah. So that was
So
the start.
so very cool. And I guess the other question I have, how long before you fully transitioned? Like you were looking at some, retirement was in the scope of
Right.
things. How long before you retired and uh were full-time in inspections?
So I was able to retire in 2020. That was my 20 years in. And at that point, I mean, things were just full steam ahead. I was going to stay on the job for a couple more years, but it just wasn't making sense. Things were
Right.
looking really good for the business. And I said, you know what, I'm going to leave on time. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, COVID happened. And that was like a fantastic year for real estate
Boom.
because everybody wanted out of the city and it was just exploding. Um, so it was just every year it was just getting better and better. But yeah, 2020 was it for us.
We were at 2020. So we were on a Zoom call this morning, the managers of my company, and we had a Zoom with Tom Ferry, who's a big real estate coach, And he
Sure.
said 2021. Now, he does not pull punches, right? He does not worry about the audience or how something lands, but he said 2021 was the year for real estate when the entire industry was basically on champagne and cocaine. Now, that is
Yeah,
not the metaphor that I would use, but yeah, you needed to be full time that year because yeah, we were busy. It was crazy.
it
So,
was.
um, having like an ask the inspector thing is a special thing, and I want to dive into some of the things that are concerning our audience, and for people that are kind of Google searching, what should I know? And we're here in Westchester, Putnam County, the Hudson Valley. This is our backyard. This is our market, and we have older housing stock uh, by far. We have older infrastructure. We have a different housing inventory than they have in other parts of the country.
Sure.
And when someone comes to me with like, a printed out article from like the Austin, Texas, real estate advice column, it's like, now we got to keep it local. So people need to know you're a New York guy. We're in the Hudson Valley, Westchester, Putnam County. You live in Putnam now, right? If I'm not
Yes,
mistaken,
correct.
right? Um, but you were in Yorktown. So let's talk about first of all the environmental silo. People want to live in a house that is safe, the air is good, health and safety are a big thing. This is why you get a home inspection is for your health and for your safety. Um, what are some of the things that are like when I was a kid, lead paint, don't eat the paint. There were
Right.
commercials and everything like that. But what is the new lead paint? Is it mold? Is it radon? Is it oil? Is it, you know, drilled wells? Is it asbestos? Or is it all the above? I mean, we just, is
I
everything
mean, yeah, people have different thresholds for what really bothers them. We're definitely, I'm a mold assessor as well, so I deal with mold all the time.
okay?
Mold is a huge one. When people hear that word, they kind of panic. Even after they buy the house, like a year later, they might see some mold. They panic. But definitely, when we hear the word mold, people you could see their face change. That and asbestos is definitely concerning. Now, those are two things that we generally will find at the time of inspection, right? But there are other things that come after that, like water testing. So those results come back from a lab. So we don't get to see their reaction of that, but we do hear it when they call us and they're freaking out that their water is, contaminated and they might need a system. So here in the Hudson Valley, we have a lot of well water, and the
Yeah,
well
we do.
water can be contaminated. I tell people all the time, if you're buying a vacant home with a well, chances are it's going to fail for bacteria because the water's not moving. So I kind of like set them up for that. I'm like, don't panic. It's probably going to fail, and if it passes, they're happy. But and then radon testing. That's another one that when if people coming from the city, they don't know what radon is, and then once they hear that the radon is elevated, they panic. But
Right.
it could be easily mitigated. So everything could be fixed. It's just a matter of getting the right contractors in place and taking care of it.
All right. So let's take a bite out of each one. First of all, mold. Uh, Big deal. We you see a patch of black mold or something like that. It's a big concern. What causes mold and what's the what's the fix?
So generally, the conditions have to be right for mold to grow. We generally will see mold forming and growing in areas that are not climate controlled, like attics, basements, crawl spaces. That's where you're going to see most of the mold occur. If we see mold somewhere else, then there must be a leak in the wall or something like that. There has to be a
Hmm.
source. So, but generally, we'll see it a lot in attic spaces. Generally that does not affect the living space below, but again, it should be mold free. The house shouldn't have mold growing in it. And really, the fix is when we have mold, we have to have a mold assessment done. That's something that we could do. So a mold assessment is basically a remediation plan. So we're trying to figure out what caused the mold, and then we're coming up with a plan for a company to remediate that mold. Okay, so those are the steps.
Got it.
Then once everything is in place, they pick their contractor. We go back after to make sure they follow the plan.
Gotcha. And this much I know. A dehumidifier. in a basement is a great preventative measure, if I'm not
For
mistaken,
sure.
to make sure that mold does not become a problem. Am I
For
right?
sure. Yeah,
I'm right.
100%. So
Yes,
again, so
I'm right.
climate controlled, you got to keep things climate controlled. It's key. So just a pro tip here, if you're showing a house or any of your agents or anyone watching, if you go into a house and how many times you go into a house and you see an old pool table down in the basement? A lot of times, ping pong tables. For some reason, mold loves to grow on the bottom of those things. So take a look around, and if you go down into a basement and it smells musty, mustiness is mold. There's mold there. Okay. It's not just that things are old, there's mold.
Gotcha. And I know what grows on top of ping pong tables and pool tables. Laundry. Laundry grows on top
Yeah,
of them, right?
100%. Yes, it does. But nobody looks underneath.
All right. So this is true. We better look underneath. All right. So the other one of the other like, uh, charged things is asbestos.
Yes.
This was, if I'm not mistaken, the miracle compound because it didn't burn. It couldn't burn.
Correct.
Therefore, it was considered this clever idea for insulation of pipes around heaters and everything like that. And then, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, we realized, oh, this causes a particularly bad form of cancer. So
Yes.
talk to me about uh, what can be done to address asbestos.
So there's different types of asbestos, like you were saying. You have asbestos siding, okay, which really doesn't pose any risk because it's outside, okay. So insurance companies don't like to hear that. So if they look at a report or they send someone out and they say, "Hey, the house is from 1968, you have asbestos," you know what? I mean, it's not going to really hurt anybody, but yeah, you have asbestos. Most people will wrap that with vinyl. They'll keep it on there and just wrap the house with vinyl. So I wouldn't necessarily remove it. We also do see it in attics. It's called vermiculite. It's like little pebbles. It's like shiny pebbles. They really stopped using that around like 1990. So you might find it like early 90s builds still.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I've seen it in different, even condos, I've seen it. So but up into the 90s, I have seen it. And then, so that kind of insulation is not, even if it's not definitively asbestos, they basically right now have been saying leave it alone. Don't touch it. You don't have to do anything. Just leave it there. Don't disturb it. And it's all considered asbestos, even if you don't test it. So if you test it, it's going to probably come back with asbestos. But that's why they say if you see vermiculite, just consider it asbestos at this point. The most dangerous kind of asbestos is the one that's wrapped on the heating pipes. Okay. And
Right.
that one, it will become airborne. And when it goes airborne, if someone disturbs it or it's just starting to kind of fall apart, kids might be down in the basement playing around and it goes airborne. You don't want to breathe that in. That's the worst kind. The other one is floor tiles. So we see it a lot. You'll see it under carpeting sometimes, maybe in a closet where it's left over. The floor tiles, you know, are probably going to be asbestos if they're a certain size, and also the adhesive that holds them down. I mean, back in the day, they used asbestos for almost everything.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
it was like in everything. So it's probably going to be in some older homes, but really, I wouldn't panic. There's definitely companies out there that can handle it. So,
Right.
and
So you
we could test for it as well.
gotcha. And it's particularly with the kind that is a potential threat if it's airborne. Um, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, there's really two potential ways to remediate it. One is to wrap it, just
Yes.
airtight wrap it, and that way it can't get airborne because it's contained.
Right.
And the other is to have a professional company come in and remove it. But we're not talking about Uncle Bill. We're talking about like a professional certified
Yes.
company, right?
Yes. It's very expensive to remove it. Very expensive to dispose of it. I mean, they're in the white suits, like containment. It's a big deal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But in relative terms, it's got to get done one way or the other,
Correct.
and you just choose your which end of the budget spectrum you want to be on, I suppose, right?
Correct. I mean, but again, if you have asbestos in your house and it's not disturbed, it's not going to cause a problem. Like it's not a creepy monster. It's not coming to get you. Like as long as you leave it alone, you're good. Like if you encapsulate it, like you were saying, have it covered. then you have nothing to worry about. But if you want to take the next step and remove it, you can do that as well. So those are things that you and the lawyers will negotiate.
Gotcha. So I want to talk about um, submerged oil tanks. All right, this is a big thing. Uh, Sometimes people, the amount of misinformation about this sort of thing, by the way, is incredible. Like,
Yes.
no, there's no law that you have to dig up your submerged oil tank tomorrow, right? That's like those Facebook memes where I forbid Facebook from using my. That's baloney, It's just, this was on
Right.
Geraldo, but talk to me about uh what the protocol is. I'm looking at a house. It's got a buried oil tank. That's got to get tested. It either passes or fails. What's like the contingency tree this way?
So there's a couple of things. So first of all, my house, I bought a house in Yorktown, and I wasn't a home inspector at that time, and we found a house during an open house and made an offer. Our agent didn't see the house, and then we do the home inspection, and she's like, "Oh, look over there. There's pipes coming out of the ground. It's buried oil tank. That has to be tested." And so okay, so we had it tested, and sure enough, it failed, and it had to come out. So it had to come out, and so did the contaminated soil. So they have to dig it up until there's no contamination. So those holes can get very, very big. I've seen 20-foot down holes around foundations have to be dug out. So it is a very big deal. I've literally seen where the oil gets into the ground, contaminates somebody's drinking well, the well water, and they have oil coming out of their spigots. So not a good thing when DEP shows up to your house and start digging up the lawn and hands you a $50,000 bill. It's a huge deal. So, and just because if you see the pipes coming out of the ground, you know you have a buried tank. But if you don't, if they cut it out, right? They abandon it, filled it with sand, whatever the case may be, the tank still might be there. So when we go into a house and we're near the furnace or the boiler and we see disconnected oil lines and they're not in the same area where the new oil tank is, or you have a house from 1968 and the tank is from 2020, then where's the old tank? Then we start asking questions. So if they say, oh, it was buried and yes, we abandoned it in the front lawn, well, now it's time to do some discovery. So we actually have the capability to locate the tank. And once we locate it, then we could pinpoint it for another inspector to come and test it and see if there's any contamination. But I recommend that tanks be removed. Generally, attorneys do recommend that as well. But if they want to keep it in the ground, there's no law saying you have to remove it, as far as I know.
Right.
But
But
it's for
but
your best interest.
you still have if you do the test on a tank that's not abandoned, which is in my experience a little bit more common than an abandoned tank with sand, but
Correct.
if that's one of the more common things, they do if I'm not mistaken what's called a suction test because or a vacuum test, and if they hear like
Yeah.
hissing or something, then they know it's been compromised.
Right.
And at that point, that tank has to go. Um, the soil gets tested. Hopefully, the soil's okay. But like you said, if the soil's not okay, it's got to be remediated. It's got to be treated. And after that, unless you can, blink and suddenly connect to gas, you're going to replace it with another oil tank that is not
Right. Right.
buried underground, right?
Right. So also keep in mind though, because there are different tests that they can do. So they can do like you were talking about an acoustic test where they're listening, and they also could do a pressure test to make sure that they could pressurize the tank. But when you pressurize the tank, if you have a corroded tank, they might actually cause a hole to form. And
Right.
but
I've heard the
it
pressure
passes.
tests are not in favor anymore because of that very
No,
reason. Like you
correct.
pointed out, it could damage the
Correct.
tank.
Correct. So if they're using that, I wouldn't recommend it. I would go with an acoustic test because you don't want to put pressure on an old tank.
Got it. Got it. All right. So another one of these, like, electrified words is radon. Right?
Yes.
Explain to me what radon is and,
So
how we fix it if the radon is high.
sure. So radon is a natural gas that seeps up through any foundation cracks. I mean, any penetrations, even like your water line coming into the house, any penetrations can cause this to come into the house. And radon at an elevated level can cause lung cancer. So it's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States. So we test for radon generally anywhere north of the Bronx. It's recommended. We test for radon, and if there is high radon, then it has to be taken care of with a mitigation system. A mitigation system is a very simple install. It's basically a PVC pipe that goes into the slab of the house in the basement or crawl space, and then they have a fan connected to it. It removes the air under the slab and puts it over the roof line. So very, reasonable install, probably $2,000 to $2,500, and it's all done. So there's a gauge on the system, so you can kind of keep an eye on it. You'll know that the fan is running, so you know it's working. And then at that point, if I knew I had radon in my house, I'm going to probably have like a continuous monitor just to make sure that it's working. And I would also retest it probably every 2 years.
Right.
Um,
And those systems, like you said, they're pretty simple. I mean, it's
yeah,
not like this. It's definitely not like an oil spill. I mean, and maybe it's a $2,000 system. It looks like almost like a downspout, and it releases the air, the any captured radon into the environment where it's
correct.
dispersed and harmless.
Right.
Right.
And they just really started testing for that in the 80s.
Yeah.
So this is really not, something that was tested for. But I mean, there's a good amount of radon. Sometimes I'm surprised where we find it. Different parts of Westchester definitely have it. And I mean Putnam County, wherever you have rock ledge, like if I see a house and I'm like, this house is like built into rock ledge, like chances are you're gonna have elevated radon levels. Another thing that sometimes I'll see, and preventatively, like builders are putting in like sumps for sump pumps, like in case there's flooding. So they're making penetrations in the foundations now, and they're just leaving them. And there's been some developments that I've inspected and I've done radon tests, and they've come back very high, probably because they literally have a giant hole in the ground.
That's funny how that works, right?
Yeah. So
Okay. So let's talk about water. You mentioned before, there's a lot of folks on well around here. Um, Northern Westchester, horse country, God knows, Putnam Duchess. Um, so you got to test the water, right?
yes.
And uh, the water either passes or fails the test. Where to go from there? Like what do you do?
So there's different regulations as well for home inspectors. We particularly don't test water in Westchester, Rockland counties, because it's actually on the sellers to take care of. So we generally do water sampling for the buyers, but nonetheless, we're doing water testing. Some loans, like FHA and VA, they require specific water tests to be done. Also, East Fishkill, Hopewell Junction, there's a special test that has to be done there as well. So not every inspector can just go and take water. You have to be very careful where you're taking water from, because if you're in a certain area, you could be wasting the client's money. But basically, we're testing for a lot of contaminants. We do give our clients the option, because water testing's gotten very expensive. Like these labs just keep raising their rates like everything else. So it's like, do you want to just test for bacteria, or do you really want to know what's going on with the water? So, I mean, we have mineral levels, salt, chlorine. I mean, there's just the nitrates. There's just so much that goes into water testing. And again, for the most part, everything could be treated. But there are some things that may come up that you could maybe need a $10,000 water treatment system. Like, so it's really worth it for people to do just more than the basic bacteria, because you don't want to get stuck with a big bill, after you close. Like if you need a softener, softener is like $3,000. Like these things are not cheap. These filtration systems, like if you have a well, let's say at the front of your house, and it happens to be like on a main road, you're probably going to have elevated sodium levels, because when there's salt in the roads, where's the salt going? Right?
Yeah, exactly,
Right to
right?
the ground.
Yeah.
So those are things that we definitely try and, we put it into perspective. We'll warn people. We'll be like, listen, this might be an issue. We don't try and scare them. We just want to like be real with them, and then say, listen, everything could be fixed. We'll give you a contractor. You'll talk to them, and they'll take care of everything that you need. There's UV systems, so ultraviolet light systems that can kill bacteria in the water. There's softeners. At the very least, I like to see a sediment filter. All right, because you're pulling water out of the ground. There's a pump, it's very deep, and you get some sediment that comes out. So if you don't have a filter, you're just getting whatever dirt is at the bottom of the well. So at the very least, I like to see that.
It's funny. Speaking of that, filtration system. I was on an inspection way upstate, long way up, Ulster County.
Okay.
And there was some sort of filtration system built in, and they told me that it it is so it's so filtery. I mean, like microns or something. Like it was really
Yes.
small particles. Is there like a name for that sort of thing? Because it sounded like it was very thorough, like it would keep out like really small
So yeah, there's
particles.
different, like anything else, there's different grades of filtration. I mean, I have a 5 micron filter on my house, and then I have a softener on my house. And those two things, like when I bought my home, this is my first well, and when we bought the house, like I really didn't like the taste of the water. I didn't like the way it felt. The people who sold me the house loved it, but when I put on that softener and put the sediment filter in, it changed the water completely. And then we have another filter on the refrigerator, so it's like getting filtered again. But but there's different levels of filtration, and a lot of people I find, if they have a sediment filter and it doesn't have a clear enclosure, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, right? You're not going to see how
Right.
different it is. So a lot of people don't even touch it. They don't even clean it. They don't change it. I find that a lot. So you can get an enclosure that's clear, and you can see through it, and you can see that the filter's dirty and time to change. But if you don't see it, they might ignore it.
I vote for see it so that
Yeah,
you
100%.
maintain it, change the filters, and keep yourself healthy.
Yes.
All right. So here's another one. I found out the hard way on a home inspection probably 15 years ago that in the late 60s, early 70s, some genius decided that instead of copper wiring inside circuit panels, that they would go with aluminum. And then they
Yes.
found out, oh, not a good idea. Tell me about that. What's the deal with aluminum in some about 50-year-old houses?
Yeah.
Vietnam War
So
era builds.
exactly. Right. So when copper was very hard to get, they thought it was a good idea to use single strand aluminum wires, which, it conducts electricity, but it doesn't work as well as copper, and it's a known fire hazard. So when we see a home that has that, we call it out right away. There is a fix for it. It's not like you have to rewire the entire house. There is a system that they can put in place and crimp new wires to it, and that will basically take care of that for you. But single strand aluminum wiring is a huge fire hazard that should be taken care of. And sometimes people confuse. There's another kind of wiring that looks kind of like it's a silverish color, but it's not like shiny. So when you see aluminum, like it's shiny, like think aluminum foil, that shiny,
Right. Right.
right?
So
But if
shiny
you look,
bad.
right,
Shiny not
shiny
good.
bad, not good. So don't look at the shiny object. So it's kind of like a dull, like a dull, silver color is like nickel clad copper. Okay. So just
Oh,
because you see something that looks like aluminum doesn't mean it is. If it's very shiny, like aluminum foil, it's aluminum. Okay. But if you can kind of see that inside the wire, there's a copper color, that's just nickel clad copper.
got it.
Okay.
All right. We've checked a lot of boxes here, but there's a couple other things I want to touch on. Um, you mentioned before earlier about cracks. All right. There are cracks and there are cracks. So if I see a crack in the foundation wall or the foundation slab, where what's what's the line between, a superficial crack as we call it, or a crack that
Right.
you better address that. So
Right.
let's
So
talk crack.
let's talk cracks. Yeah, cracks are great. So yeah, basically, if you could put your fingers inside of the crack and get your mind out of the gutter, but if you could put your fingers in there, then it may be a structural crack. Okay. If you see that like the foundation now, there's a crack, and now you have it shifted where it's not even lined up anymore, things are moving. That's not good. So that's when it's like structural engineer time. But if you just see a hairline crack, you're going to see that. You might even see if you have concrete block. Sometimes you'll see these like step cracks, right? It kind of goes
Yeah.
along each block.
Yeah, with
So
cinder block.
that's yeah. So that's nothing to worry about. Also, if you have a poured concrete foundation, sometimes like in between pours, right? When the truck runs out of concrete, they'll get another truck in there and you'll see a little line where the concrete meets. And that is a weak spot, honestly. Sometimes, like, those can be areas where water could potentially come in if you backfill it that much. But again, not a structural issue. So, really, the only thing is, in my opinion, if you could see through to the other side and put your fingers in it, or it's shifted, or bowed out, that's it. Other than that, superficial cracks, you could definitely ignore them. If you have any water coming through those cracks, there's ways to mitigate that too. So now they have, like, these epoxies that they can inject into the foundation and it seals it up tight. You'll never get water in.
Okay. And there's no perfect house. I mean, foundations settle, it's not like we're, um, tectonic plates are tossing the house about, but,
Sure.
things settle.
Sure.
Um, Tell me, and this is different, but, I just think of this is the sewer scope. Tell me about the sewer scope you guys do.
So the sewer scope was a game changer for us. And I wish that when I bought my house in Yorktown, the inspector had one because we had a tremendous issue. So we bought the house and started having backups, and it was just a nightmare. Our sewer pipe was in our slab and literally traveled down a hallway and into the garage. So we had terrible odors because sewage was leaking into the dirt and then eventually seeping into the basement, and it was terrible. So we had multiple cracks in the pipe that was in the slab, and we had to replace the entire thing, and then we had to replace it out to the street as well. So, which is really a big deal. So when I got into home inspections and I had that terrible experience, I saw that sewer scopes was a thing. I'm like, why would I not do this? Like, I could literally save people from what I went through. So I went and got trained, and I bought a sewer scope, and I started doing sewer scopes. It's a great thing. It's a camera. I mean, our camera goes over 100 feet. So generally, we're going out from the sewer trap in the, wherever it is, basement, garage, whatever, going out as far out as we can go. We really want to get to where it connects to the municipal line. So
Right.
people don't realize that, like, they're like, oh, it's in the street. That's not mine. Not true. It's yours until it connects to the municipal connection. So think about that. Like, you can have a crack in your pipe or a failure, and by the time you're in the street, you're probably about 15 feet down. And depending on where the street is, you might be on a main road. You have to get police officers there to direct traffic. It could be a nightmare. It can cost you $50 to $100,000. So for us, it's peace of mind. Again, I don't scare anyone, but I tell them my experience and why I do it,
Yeah.
and usually they go for it.
I mean, I don't see any reason not to. I mean,
Yeah,
this is your one chance to get the snake and the camera in there and just see what the future holds for you, right? Plus, it's
100%.
so cool. I
It's
mean,
awesome.
I know there's a lot of people, might be like, ew, but it's so cool.
It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Like the
yeah.
human eyes haven't been down
I
there.
mean, I'll rent it out to you on the weekends. You can do whatever you like with it.
All right, I got another question for you. Kind of, we're in the lightning round here. Um, there's a lot of houses that have 100 amp circuit panels. All right. Not big houses, little starter homes typically.
Yep.
But should they upgrade, all things being equal, or is that enough for modern folks who might have a couple laptops in the house and some TVs?
Yeah. So 100 amps is the minimum. So that's the
Right,
minimum standard for today. Depending on the size of the house and depending on what people want, like if they're like, hey, I'm going to want central air, then you know what? It might be time for an upgrade. If they're like, hey, I want to, get an EV charger and they're kind of at their limit, it might be time for an upgrade. If you're happy with what you have in the house and you're not planning on adding any new appliances that are going to draw a lot of power, stick with the 100 amps. But if you're going to need something, then you may want to, budget for that.
right. So if you've got a swimming pool, or if you've got central air, or if you're going to use maybe even like an electric dryer, it's going to need a 220. So, 100 amperage might not be enough.
Correct.
But if you're really living like light, then you can get by, but it's the minimum
Correct.
standard for today, right?
Right. Like if I'm inspecting a multifamily and I see each unit has 100 amps, I'm like, okay, you're good. Like that's fine because you're splitting the load. But, generally, a small house can get away with 100 amps. If you're
Okay.
looking at a bigger home, you should probably upgrade.
Okay. Um, Look, this is good stuff. We've punched on we've checked a lot of boxes here. Um, is there any other like fairly common health and safety thing that we ought to we ought to touch on?
So I think the biggest thing, and people ask me all the time, like, what causes deals to fall apart? And for me, a lot of times it's people going out on the weekends and they're looking at houses and their agent's not available and they view a house and they're like, oh my God, I love it. And the agent's like, oh, it looks really nice. Okay, let's do it. Let's book a home inspection. So they call and I show up and I find a gigantic retaining wall that nobody saw and it's failing and it's huge. And you're probably looking at a $50,000, replacement. That is something that is not good. So I would say, to those agents that maybe are not as experienced, if you're going to make offers on homes, try and preview it because I know it's a pain in the neck to go there, but if you don't see it, you might waste 3 hours of your time booking an inspection, sitting through an inspection just to find the deal fall apart.
It shouldn't be I'll stand on my soapbox here. It shouldn't be a pain in the neck to do your job. The an agent, in my opinion, should never write an offer on a property on behalf of a client without having seen that property themselves, right? Just like you said, preview the property. We are not home inspectors, we're not structural engineers, but we're not unfamiliar with certain red flags, and we
Right,
want to advise our clients. That's why we go on showings to begin with. So
right.
yeah, go to the open house. You love it. I'll go preview it. I'll take the time. It's part of my due diligence anyway. Uh, couldn't agree more. Could
Yeah,
not agree more.
perfect.
Sight unseen is a bad way to go. All
Yeah.
right. I want to do a part two because there's just so much more, and people eat this stuff up. So, I'm gonna wrap it up now, and
Okay.
but just for now, this is just part one. We're gonna do this again,
Sounds good.
and then we're gonna have you come talk to the team on the 25th next week.
Yeah, next week. Get
Awesome.
some bagels.
All right. Well, we're right next to Bagel Emporium, but more on that.
Exactly. Yep.
Um, Dude, thank you so much. I
Thank
greatly
you.
appreciate it. And
Awesome.
to be continued. Josh Stone,
Don't
Stone Home
for
Inspections,
Thank you,
for
sir.
for your peace of mind and for your health and safety. What is your tagline again?
For your protection, get a stone home inspection.
Love it.
Yeah.